Hello everyone, I'm back with another video for you today, and I wanted to make a bit of a follow-up video, essentially, to the last video that I made about the state of Marvel's Snap sort of balancing, and the game in general, and sort of the mentality of the developers. So, if you haven't seen that video already, basically what I was saying, my hypothesis was that the developers are using data to balance certain cards, and sometimes that can be a bit of an inefficient or ineffective way of balancing a card game like this, because sometimes there are things that are shown in the data that, without proper context of what's going on within the game, can be misinterpreted and cause you to do some bizarre changes, or, cause the meta to be stagnant as a result, and that kind of thing. So that was sort of the concept of that video. I wanted to make a follow-up video because we've had some recent changes, again, to the Marvel Snap meta. I think there's a few things that I just want to discuss here about sort of the card collecting aspect of things, the progression system, all of that stuff, right? As well as the way that cards are being changed. And I think there's some merit to a perspective that I'll start talking about here. We'll get into it now. So basically, what's going on? So Red Skull's been changed. I mean, this is a little strange. So basically, the devs have changed Red Skull again. It's been sort of nerfed again. It was nerfed once already. The Shuri deck, of course, is a very strong deck in the meta, or it has been for a while. Kind of was quite possible to see that coming, I think. If you look at my previous video discussing these things, I was making the claim that Shuri would probably still be a very strong deck. I think that was not something that, for many players, probably yourself included, you were able to see that coming. So this is all a little bit strange to me, right? The fact that they've changed Red Skull after already changing it, and they've said that they will be changing Shuri. So Shuri right now is working, in the same way that she's always worked, doubling the power of the next card you play. They are going to change Shuri, but they're apparently not able to do this in sort of a very quick fix in the way that they've changed some of these cards here. So this strikes me as a little bit strange. Like, if I don't know, there's a couple of options here, right? Either these guys kind of don't know what they're doing when it comes to balancing cards. They're just interpreting data really in a wonky manner, right? If they're kind of now nerfing Shuri, what does that mean? It means the data shows that Shuri now is actually definitely the problem. That's one possibility, right? That they're not really sure what's going on. They're a little bit lost. They're nerfing the cards that are not necessarily the reason the archetype is powerful, like a Red Skull, and instead the Shuri is what makes that deck very strong, and now they've come to realize that because the data has now shown them. So that's one possibility. There's also another possibility, which some people have talked about, which I think is quite worrying if it were to be true, and I think it's a bit worrying that there's even potential that it's true. So let me explain what that perspective is. So, of course, Shuri right now is a Series 4 card, which means it's a bit more expensive to get. Not as many players will have it in their collections. Shuri will be dropping down to Series 3 at some point in the near future. I think it's next patch, basically. So on the next sort of time when cards are downgraded, Shuri will be coming to Series 3. So this kind of begs the question, what's going on here? Is Shuri getting nerfed? Is it a coincidence that Shuri is getting nerfed as she drops down into Series 3? Is it a coincidence that they just have avoided nerfing this very powerful card that presumably a lot of people have, in favor of waiting until it gets to Series 3 to nerf it? I think there's a very interesting question to be asked there. I'm not really one for conspiracy theories, but it does make you wonder, is their balance decision-making process being influenced by the series level of a card? It might not be. I mean, they've nerfed Sunspot as well. Sunspot's a card that everybody has, right? So they've definitely gone ahead and nerfed that to 0 power. They've nerfed Series 3 cards. They've nerfed even things like Thanos, which is sort of one of the big bads, right? You might think they'd be reluctant to nerf that if it were all about the economy and what players have access to. I think there's just a couple of things going on here that are a bit strange, right? So number one, card play rates and the data that the devs have are going to depend on how many people have the card in their collection, right? If less people have access to a card, if the card is a higher series thing, like, I don't know, maybe a Thanos or a Galactus or whatever, or a Null, then players are going to have less access to that, so there'll be a smaller sample size from which accurate data can be gathered. So if you've got something like null, let's just say, then this card could be very, very strong, but it might be hard for that to be noticeable because not that many players would be using it or abusing it, right? Compared to something like a Sunspot or a Killmonger, like whatever it might be. So that's the first interesting predicament that the card collection system that Marvel Snap has is creating. I think it's making it maybe difficult for the developers to actually notice or see when a card is particularly strong because it's not represented well in the data from that, you know, from that point of view, I suppose we could say. So that's not problem number one. Problem number two is perhaps there is an incentive to be changing or not changing cards because of the cost of them or how easy they are to acquire. That's a bit of a troubling idea because it means that you can have some metas that become quite stagnant, quite unfun to play, just if the developers don't want to nerf a certain thing because it's, say, a very powerful Pool 6 card, you know, which players will spend all their tokens on. They'll want to play with this, enjoy this. So that's another interesting issue, right? If that is something that influences the design decisions, then that could be a bit of a potential problem for the health and enjoyment that players feel when they play the game. The last problem that I think it's kind of the converse of that, the opposite in a way, is if they do nerf a thing like Shuri. I mean, there's a lot of players, myself included, right, who've spent tokens on Shuri because it's such a powerful card, it's such a staple in the meta, particularly if they don't show signs of wanting to nerf it for a long time. Then when they finally do get round to nerfing a card like this, then it can be particularly punishing for people who have spent tokens on it. So this is sort of the converse to them not wanting to nerf things because of people spending tokens on them. Here, there is definitely a tangible effect to nerfing a card like Shuri, right? It's going to mean that perhaps some players spent a lot of tokens on her. They had a very strong deck that they enjoyed, and now they won't have access to that. They will have spent their tokens. They won't have perhaps a different card that they could have bought, and that might, you know, take away their enjoyment from the game a bit, make them less likely to want to come back to Marvel Snap. So that could be a negative thing as well. I think a lot of these problems seem to stem from the card acquisition system that Marvel Snap has, and I think it's just really at this point going to be very detrimental to the game. I think we're actually now players are beginning to get to that sort of Pool 3 end game where it becomes a lot more difficult to collect cards. You're getting those collector tokens instead, and the rate of card unlocks is a lot lower. We're also getting to the point where I think the lack of new card releases in the typical way that they would be released for a card game, you know, things like just expansions coming out with lots of new cards that you can get your hands on, fresh things to try out and experiment with. Without all of that, that's very lacking in Marvel Snap. You know, you have this one card coming. People have made this point many times. I'm aware it's not a new concept. The idea of one card coming into Series 5 or 3 cards or whatever it is each month, you know, one season pass card that you can buy if you want to spend money on the game, which a lot of players don't necessarily want to just fork out cash, you know, to be able to try new things in this game. Yeah, I think that's a bit of a dangerous way in terms of for the health of the game and for the enjoyment of players to be introducing new cards. I think the drip feed is just, at some point, the sunk cost that a player feels in terms of their collection and the time and money they've put into the game, that feeling will eventually be outweighed by lack of fun, stagnation, just sort of not enjoying the game enough to sort of overcome that, you know, the sunk cost is going to be battling with that feeling of ennui or pain that they feel playing the game in some sense, I think. Obviously, this won't apply to all players. There's going to be people that still enjoy the game and that are having fun. I'm talking about just as a whole, like the player base. When you're only being drip-fed, like maybe you get to play one new card every couple of months or something like that, of these new Series 5 cards that are added to the game. Maybe you get one of those in you know, takes a few months and you eventually get it. I think that's just a really uninteresting way to be releasing cards, and I think it's going to lead to players sort of checking out of the game. It's going to mean Marvel Snap's this game that you sort of just log into and you play your daily quests, if that. Maybe you occasionally just will play it when you have a bit of free time, but otherwise it's just not something you're that invested or interested in. Now that's okay. Maybe Marvel Snap wants to be that kind of a card game. Maybe it doesn't want to, you know, be this mainstay, powerful thing in the minds of people where they are, you know, trying to, they're playing a lot of Marvel Snap, they're making a lot of cool decks, they're spending a lot of their time and money and whatever it might be on the game. I just think it's worth noting, I've definitely been feeling very burnt out from Marvel Snap recently. I'll probably also be taking a bit of a break in terms of I'm just also preparing for some tournament in another card game as well, so I'll probably not be playing too much Marvel Snap this month, but that's besides the point, I feel. At the end of the day, I just think, yeah, it's worth being said that this card acquisition model is just not... It's not really a feels good for the game, you know? I'm looking at Legends of Runeterra, for example. They've had such a big success story, I think, with their recent changes, with their expansion that's come out, with their rotation of cards. I think that really highlights the flaws with Marvel Snap in a big way. I think the ability for a card game to bring a bunch of new stuff, get players excited, it's something that Marvel Snap just can't really do, you know? Marvel Snap's basically just this like grind fest, hamster wheel economy that we're all just sort of getting drip fed cards here and there, but there's never really that real excitement and enthusiasm that can come from big card game, you know, expansion releases like with Legends of Runeterra. So I think that's definitely a negative aspect of this game, and it's something that as a content creator it also feels very stifling, right? To not be able to, well, firstly, you can't even make all the decks in the game. I can't experiment as much as I'd like to because I don't have all the cards, as well as that, just the lack of new expansions, the lack of getting hands-on with a bunch of new stuff ever. It just creates sort of this quite boring and grindy feeling loop and makes you feel a bit more burnt out more quickly, I'd say. And there's nothing to really bring you straight back into the action in the way that there would be, you know, for other card games. So the other point that I want to mention is the ranking system right now is just so rubbish, if we're being honest, right? There feels to me to be no reason really to play the game other than to grind daily missions. In other card games, you have this maybe a ranking system that, you know, for competitive players like myself, I'm sure there's quite a few of you out there. Maybe you're not one of those people, that's fine. But for competitive players, I think you need a proper sort of competitive ecosystem to make the game more interesting, to encourage players to want to improve, to play the game more, to be invested and properly integrated into the game and the ecosystem there. So I think Marvel Snap really lacks that. I mean, you just play like a few hours in a month, you get to infinite rank if you're a pretty, you know, somewhat competitive player, and there's nothing more beyond that. There's tons of bots on the ladder, you're not actually playing against human opponents a great deal of the time. At least for me, I've noticed a lot more bots now than there have been in past seasons as well. I wonder if that's just to do with the player base sort of dwindling a bit, perhaps? I don't know about that. That's just conjecture. That's how it feels to me. I don't know if that's just incorrect. It could also be to do with the matchmaking changes they made, right? They made it so you're less likely to be playing against somebody who is further away in ranks to you. So it might just be that that has caused there to be more bots because new system and whatnot. But I just think, yeah, the lack of competitiveness with Marvel Snap is a bit of an issue in terms of for competitive players, right? That's a bit of a given. And I just feel like it would really help if there was some kind of tournament scene or, you know, ranked ladder that then qualified you for stuff, or even a proper leaderboard with, I know that's something they've mentioned they want to bring, but as things stand, even just implementing a leaderboard for this current ranking system wouldn't really do anything because it's just full of bots. There's no competitive integrity to the ranking system at all. It's just, you know, just grind games if you want to get higher rank, really. I mean, you're going to play against bots. Win rates are just off all over the place. Like, it's not like other card games where, you know, you're very happy if you get like a 60% win rate. You can win every single game against a bot because the bots are not very good. And they're sort of, yeah, I mean, I think you guys understand the point I'm trying to make. So I think that's also a big factor for why the game feels quite stale. And I think that there needs to be some change there as well if they want people to be more invested with the game. If not, again, it's just going to be more people sort of signing off, not being that interested and worried about playing regularly or improving at the game. I think it would just be that sort of toilet game, which maybe it was always intended to be. Maybe that's not an issue. Those are just some thoughts on this. What needs to be done? I don't know. I just think maybe this is just the way that Marvel Snap's meant to be. Maybe it will always have this problem. I don't know if there's any way at this point to revamp things. They've tried some stuff, right? You get like a free Series 3 card every month. I think the problem is they just built this game from the ground up to be quite predatory, quite, you know, it's psychologically manipulative in many ways. And I think a lot of the systems being built around that have led to the inability to gain some of the benefits that normal card games have, and as such you get some downsides as well from this progression system. But I mean, I'm not sure there's anything more to say about that, really. It just seems to me that it's difficult to enjoy this game in the way that it is for some other card games, perhaps. Now, some of that might just be burnout talking. So I'm going to take a bit of a break from the game for a little bit. I hope you guys will still be, you know, interested in watching my videos when I come back. Of course, if not, that's the way of the world. But I think a little, maybe that's the way to do Marvel Snap, right? You just don't play it as much as other card games which have more of this sort of available content, essentially. I mean, the way you can think of it is there's less content in Marvel Snap than there could be, essentially, right? Because you have, there's content, it exists, but you don't have access to it unless you want to pay exorbitant amounts of money to get that, which I'm not particularly interested in personally. So yeah, that's some thoughts. Let me know what you think about my opinions there. You might disagree. Let me know if you're enjoying the game currently, or if I'm not alone in feeling a bit burnt out and a bit, you know, a bit disillusioned with the game currently. I'm sure, you know, my feelings of positivity will come back in the future, perhaps, as I, you know, take a bit of a break and then come back. But do let me know. Subscribe as always for more content. Maybe not for a couple of weeks, but yeah, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.